Confusion's an interesting thing, though. A great deal is made of confusion in spirituality. It seemed to be the problem. I must not be realized because I'm so confused. The only real confusion is the idea that there's not supposed to be confusion. The idea that confusion has a solution, or that confusion has a resolution, or confusion is supposed to be solved or finalized or somehow transcended to come to some final absolute clarity that has integrity and pristine coherence and so on and so forth. That's the carrot on a string that we torment ourselves with. I'm so confused because I don't have clarity. I'm so confused because I can't see what anything is clearly. But the idea that is supposed to be a resolution to confusion in actuality is what the real confusion consists of. Nothing in the world has ever made sense. Nothing in the world has ever resolved itself into coherence. You've never known exactly what anything is. You never know exactly how you're doing. Are you succeeding? Are you failing? Depends how you look at it, doesn't it? And the idea, the fantasy that there is some sort of an absolute resolution, some sort of absolute clarity, some sort of exit from this morass of indeterminacy is what the genuine confusion consists of. This is how we torment ourselves. I like the fennel. But if you look within your experience, you can't find any absolute or actual final coherence. Everything, things seem to have a certain degree of, consistency in the way they appear, the way they show up, different experiences. Things you see seem to have a certain degree of shape and color. Things you hear seem to have a certain degree of, modulation and patterning to them and so on. The things we think the same way. But, when you look closely, everything's fuzzy. When you look closely, nothing has really sharp edges. I mean, look at a thought. We're thinking, even if you're thinking very precisely, say you're doing mathematics or something and everything's cut and dried, it's either this or that. But look at the thoughts, they're fuzzy, they're slippery, they're strange, they're ephemeral, they're hard to pin down. There's no actual final resolution or sharpness to be found there. The same in vision. The closer you look at things, the fuzzier they get. I mean, physicists encounter this. You look closely through a microscope and things are fuzzy. Things are, are a little weird. You start seeing all these rainbows and indeterminacy around the edges of things. And experience is like that. Experience is obviously appearing. It's quite clearly what it is, but you never get the final resolution on exactly what it is. What exactly is vision? Well, it's right here, so this is it, but what is it? You're going to get the final resolution, the final word of finding exactly what vision is. Oh yeah, now I know what vision is. It's not going to happen, is it? It's, even as it is clearly present, even as it is not concealed at all, it's intrinsically fuzzy, it's intrinsically indeterminate, it's intrinsically confusing. It can't really be resolved as this or that with any degree of precision. And this is the nature of actuality, in fact. This is the nature of reality, that it is not resolvable. It is not precise. It's sloppy, it's fuzzy. It's dreamlike. It's strange. And so when you get that, the fact that your life doesn't make any sense and the fact that you can't get a handle on anything stops being a problem. It just well, of course you can't get a handle on anything because you can't get a handle on anything. I mean, look at philosophy. All of these very erudite people saying all sorts of very profound things. Has the last word been said? Has something been said that it finally has final coherence? It actually resolves into, yeah, that's it. That's the last word. That's the finish line. That's the final point of resolution. Doesn't happen, does it? Everything is fuzzy. Fuzzy logic. Fuzzy illogic. The reason for this ultimately is that reality itself is infinite. Literally infinite. And infinity has the arguably annoying property of not being resolvable as this or that. Exactly what's the value of infinity? Well, any value you want. Exactly where is infinity? Well, anywhere you look. Where does it begin? Well, kind of anywhere. Where does it end? Anywhere, or not at all. I mean, how do you resolve infinity? How do you get any kind of finality out of infinity, other than the fact of infinity itself? And if we translate the word infinity to the word confusion, in a profound sense, confusion is the ultimate quality. Irresolution, lack of boundaries, lack of center, lack of circumference, lack of reference points. The only way we can find reference points in our experience is by supplying them. And we do. Typically we don't notice we're supplying them, we just assume they're objectively true, because we've been spoon-fed all of this wonderful programming when we were growing up in the guise of language and parental guidance and so on and so forth. So, that's up and that's down. And this is somewhere in the middle. This is here and that's there. What exactly does that mean? Here is what? What's here? What's the last word on what here is? What's the last word on what there is? What's the last word on what up is? What's the last word on what down is? Good and bad. What's the last word on what good is? What's the last word on what bad is? Success and failure, that's a big one. Are you succeeding in your life or are you failing? Well, kind of somewhere in the middle in a sloppy kind of way, right? I mean, that's, how can you even tell? How can you possibly answer that question? And yet language implies that there ought to be an answer. If there is success and failure, then it ought to be something. And if it's something, you ought to be able to find it, right? But it's not really like that, is it, in terms of the actuality of experience? Things are slippery. Things are nebulous. And when you get that that's intrinsically the case with what experience is, you learn that it's not a problem that that's the case. It's not a problem that you can't get a handle on your life. It's not a problem that you can't get a handle on your identity. I mean, who are you? Who exactly are you? Who precisely are you? If you don't know, who does, right? Well, I'm me. Okay, great. Can I find me? Can I define me? Can I get to the core? Can I get to like the final, oh yeah, that's me right there, and that's not. And I can tell that that's not because I know that is. Not like that, is it? It's fuzzy. And when you get that that's inherent in what this is, it stops being a problem. It stops being something that we used to torment ourselves with, this idea of, oh my God, I got to get a handle on things. I got to get a clue. I got to at least fake it like I know what's going on so everyone around me doesn't know how out to lunch I am, how clueless I am. Of course, everyone else is equally clueless too, and they're all busy faking it too, pretending they have a clue. When you get that that's just how things are, it stops being a problem. It becomes kind of relaxing. It's kind of nice to let go into this warm, fuzzy hot tub of we can't really tell what's going on. Well, we can chat a bit if you'd enjoy that. If you wouldn't mind speaking into a microphone, it's not that we really need that in this little group, but there's people online who may be following along with the conversation. That way they can hear what you have to say.
We have a question already from online.
Uh-huh.
The question is, if my consciousness and experience is the only thing that exists for sure for me, can I know if I am alone? Will I always be alone forever?
Well, you can't define what consciousness is, you can't define what experience is, and for alone to be meaningful, there would have to be something other than alone. You are in the condition that you are, and you're not in any condition other than the same condition you've always been in. Are you alone? Are you not alone? I mean, how would you define that? How would you define aloneness? Aloneness is only meaningful if there was some kind of non-aloneness that you could relate to. You may have a fantasy of non-aloneness, but if you can't find the actuality, then you can't define aloneness. It's true that I am present in my experience. I'm present in all of my experience. And it's true that I can't know that anyone else is here. Does that mean alone? I don't know. It depends how you define it. But I can't. But that's always been the case. So is that alone? Is that not alone? It would only be true aloneness if you were separated from something or cut off from something. And yet you're not separated or cut off from anything in your experience. You have complete access, complete intimacy with anything whatsoever that shows up in your experience. So in that sense, there's no aloneness. I mean, we throw this word alone around as if we knew what it meant, as if we could resolve it. But like anything, it turns out to not really be very precise, to not be very resolvable. In short, to be confusing.
Thank you.
It's kind of nice to not need to resolve anything. Just to have experience just being, I don't know. It's kind of easy.
I get the confusion thing and the enjoyment of it too. But what you often talk about really knowing what this is. Mm-hmm. Is that, how does that figure into happy confusion?
Well, you can know that it is indeterminate. It's clearly indeterminate. It's not nothing, right? It's not nothing, but you can't say what it is, and you can know that for a fact. So you can know its indeterminacy for a fact.
Everything I'm experiencing these days seems to be, shall I say, in that direction, okay? But do I know it for a fact? I don't even know how I would, or what that means.
All right. No problem.
So knowing is indeterminate then as well.
But it isn't, though. Knowing is clearly what it is. You can't say what it is. You can't pin it down. But the fact that you can't pin it down doesn't mean it isn't clearly what it is. For example, experience is clearly being known. The very nature, the very being of experience is a knowing. Experience is a knowing of experience. Clearly. And again, the fact that you can't resolve how that is or what that is doesn't render it any less clear.
Yeah, I see that.
In other words, you can deal with indeterminacies as actualities, and you can know those actualities with ultimate profundity.
So I've asked this before, but the same goes then for like fantasies then in and of themselves. Fantasies are no less real in that sense, or
fantasies are real fantasy. Clearly, or you wouldn't experience them.
What would make it a fantasy versus anything not a fantasy?
Well, it depends how you want to define fantasy. That's up to you. I would define fantasy as a hypothetical set of circumstances which are considered to possibly be objectively existing that in fact only exist in imagination or in mentality. So they're actualities as thought, but not actualities as any non-thought event.
Yeah, that's what I've come to with the whole notion of me. It's like there's always this imagined quality, this imagined objective place, or maybe subjective place from which to see everything. It just isn't there. I mean,
well, you can't find it. You can't pin it down. There is clearly a knowing, but you can't find a knower. You can't find something that's knowing. There just is the fact of knowing, the fact of that principle in action, let's say. But you can't find a thing that's sitting somewhere that's doing some knowing. You can imagine it. You can postulate it. You can hypothesize it, but you can't find it. Or I can't. Maybe you'll have better luck.
All I find is this. It's almost like I would have to shift back and forth. There's some shifting takes place. Like there's the shifting of seeing, say. So they're seeing, and then there's sort of a not seeing in a sense, to imagine I am here to see. So there's this kind of referring back and forth to something that is in thought, I guess.
Well, that may be a claim of referring, but there's not necessarily any actual referring. There may be thought events occurring, there may be vision events occurring, let's say, in the case of vision, or some other sense field, or whatever realm of experience. And each of those realms of experience exist in their own dimension, let's say, or with their own frequency, or however that is. But they don't, the supposition that they refer to each other is just that, a supposition. I mean, that's the fallacy of fantasy or thought, that it's about something. So I can say, I'm thinking of this cup, but I'm not. I'm seeing the cup, and I'm thinking a thought which is claiming to be having something to do with the cup that I'm seeing, but it doesn't. It's just a claim. It's an empty claim. Because the thought exists only as a thought, and there's no lines connecting it to this.
That's really interesting. That is the claim.
It's the fallacy that thought is referential. That's what screws us up. We think that a thought refers to some objective reality, but it does not. It creates a version of it, claims to be of it, but it's actually its own version. So the memory that you have of yesterday is not yesterday. It differs from yesterday in every significant way, primarily being it's a thought not a full field sensory experience. So, in other words, think about your living room right now.
Okay.
The thought of your living room is not the room.
No.
It just isn't. And so the claim that you're thinking of your living room is just an assertion.
Right, I see it.
It's a facsimile. It's arguably a facsimile, but it misses the mark in every way, so it doesn't work. Or think of a friend. The thought of your friend is not your friend. It just isn't. So in what sense am I thinking of my friend? I'd just confuse myself if I think that way.
Is there any thought that isn't in that way referential? Does thought exist in any way?
Well, no thought is actually referential, but thought claims to be referential, or we may hold thought to be referential.
Would thought, how can I say it, would it exist if it weren't thinking it's referential?
Of course. Thought exists autonomously, just like vision exists autonomously. It's the presence of let's say, an energy quality in experience, in consciousness, let's say. Right? So what we call light is present in experience. You can call that vision. Whatever the thought is made of, let's say thought energy, or thought light, is present in consciousness, so we call it thought. But the light that's present in consciousness isn't about anything, it's just about light being present in consciousness. The light isn't about the thought any more or less than the thought's about the light. They may coexist in the field of experience.
So you set that down, there's a clink, there's no connection between the clink and the vision of...
Well, you can't know, can you? You hear, you see shapes and movement, you hear sound, you think thoughts, and there seems to be some sort of correlation, but you don't know what it is. We have all sorts of theories of what that correlation is, which gives rise to notions of an objective world and having bodies and having sensory apparatus and having our thoughts be analysis of all that. But all that's just theory. You can't really know if it's true. Maybe it's just a coincidence. In a dream, you can watch someone set a cup down maybe and hear a clink. Mm-hmm. There's no cup. Mm-hmm. There's no sound. Right. There's no world. Mm-hmm. But yet it looks as if there is. Can you tell for sure that a similar phenomena isn't going on here?
No, not at all.
Who knows? You can't...
I don't know what...
All you can know is the fact itself, the fact of experience. And, other than that, and this is how we trip ourselves up, is forming all of these hypotheses and then forgetting their hypotheses and assuming they're objectively true. There is a table here, there is a cup here, and when I put the cup down, it makes a sound because physics, the electrostatic fields of the electrons in the cup and the thing hit each other and makes a sound because it causes a resonance which makes the other atoms resonate, which hits your eardrums, which means, blah, blah, blah,
right.
The whole argument. It's all theory. No one knows. Because the same thing could happen in a dream, with the same theory even.
Yeah.
What's a dream? Saying it's a dream doesn't dismiss it. A dream is a dream is a real experience. This is a real experience. You can't know what a dream is any more than you can know what this is. To claim that a dream is non-physical, maybe dreams are physical. Maybe literally a world is created that somehow you inhabit, in some inexplicable way. Who knows? Maybe this world really dissolves and disappears when you go to sleep, like it seems to. Maybe it doesn't. Who knows? But it's like, it's the old question is, does the refrigerator light go out when you close the door? The only fact you can know is the immediate fact of experience, and any interpretation of it is guesswork. No matter how well reasoned and well argued, and no matter how much a part of consensus reality, where you'll see, however many millions of people say, yeah, that's how it is. Since when has the majority been right? Look at our political system, for God's sake.
They're kind of queuing up here. The person who asked before about being alone, asking it again. Exactly what was said was, is there other than me? If not, that seems kind of lonely to me.
Well, lonely means being separated from something or cut off from something. And if there's only you, how could you be lonely? Because what are you cut off from? If there is only you, then what are you cut off from? Can you be lonely in a dream? Well, you can dream you're lonely. But you can dream as many friends as you want. You can be the life of the party. You can be a rock star in your dreams. What the heck? Who cares? Are you alone then? Well, are you alone in the crowd? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? It's all down to how you define it.
And there's another one which was actually part of a conversation that happened 15 minutes ago, which is it like cluing into your open-ended cluelessness?
I'm sorry, I can't quite make out what you're saying.
Is it like cluing into your open-ended cluelessness? Knowing is really unknowing.
Yeah, it's a matter of seeing the actual condition and discovering the actuality of indeterminacy, the actuality that you can never pin anything down. And you can know that very directly and very intimately because experience, displays that consistently. You can't resolve anything. Science, look at science, modern science. The best minds of our generation, of all time, arguably, have used the resources, standing on its shoulders historically and throwing billions of dollars at looking at what's going on here. Have they gotten to the bottom of it? They don't know the last word. So you're sitting here in your experience, how is it any different with what you're looking at? Your experience is clearly actual, but no one ever has definitively said what it is. But I think it's kind of comfortable not having to resolve things. It's kind of comfortable not having to have the answers. It's kind of comfortable not having to bullshit, not having to fake it. Oh yeah, I know who I am. I know what's going on. It's kind of comfortable to shrug and say, I don't know. It's a lot easier than coming up with bullshit. Look at political candidates. Can you imagine that, having to spew bullshit like that 24/7? What a nightmare.
Peter, it feels disoriented to not be able to assign definitions to everything that's out here, the patterning.
And that's the crux of the problem, is this desire for the fantasy of orientation. Because the desire is not to orient to actuality, the desire is to orient to fantasy. Because actuality cannot be oriented to, and it doesn't need to be oriented to. You don't need to be oriented to actuality because you already are. It's already the case. You can't say what it is, and being able to say what it is would be orienting to a fantasy, i.e. the fantasy that there was resolution, the fantasy that you do know what anything is, the fantasy that anyone knows what anything is, and it's all bluster and bravado. It's all people. People's egotism. People playing power games. Oh, I know what's going on. I know what we should do.
When you define radiance, that's the same thing as patterning. Is that right? It's all energy, but then there is patterning. Everything we see is colorful.
Well,
and 3D.
I use these terms radiance and energy to try and indicate the substance of what experience is made out of, and the radiant energy that shows up as experience tends to be patterned. It does not show up with absolute unpatternedness. It does not show up with absolute randomness. It tends to be clumped. When you look at your field of vision, you don't just see a wash of totally disconnected flashes. You tend to see sort of patches of semi-coherent shapes and colors and so on and so forth, right? The same with sound, the same with thought. Everything, the energy of experience seems to show up sort of clustered or patterned.
So when you're not assigning definitions and labels, is the patterning does it is it different in any way, or is it?
It's the same, but it's just patterning. When I look at you, I don't see anything but a pattern. I don't see a person, unless a person is a name for, a pattern that I'm qualifying as that type of pattern, whatever that type of pattern is. Okay. I look at you, I look at the chair behind you. I can classify the chair as a kind of a pattern that I would call a chair, and you're the kind of a pattern I would call a person. But basically they're both just patterns. And the fact that I have one name for one kind of pattern, another name for another kind of pattern, is just my own spin doctoring, right? I supply that in my imagination.
So any definition would be arbitrary?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Because the pattern is itself, and it's unique. So you can't say exactly what it is. If there were other yous, then I could talk about Susans. But you're the only one. You're a one-off. So how can I say what you are? I can say you're a human being, but that's a pretty sloppy grouping. I mean, God, people are so different, right? So you're you. All I can say is that pattern, which doesn't really tell us very much. It doesn't define anything, does it? But if I start defining you as, you're a woman and you're this and you're that and whatever, I'm shoehorning you into all sorts of fantasies that I may hold in my imagination, which don't necessarily have anything to do with what you are. And you can't even know what you are. You don't know, you can't, if you had to tell someone exactly what you were, what would you say? I mean, how can you say that with any finality, with any completeness?
So I guess then when you don't label, then that's when there's no boundaries. Everything just kind of...
Right. When you don't label, everything is what it is, and you're not holding anything to be anything other than what it is, which is an experience. Clearly, everything in your experience is an experience. And clearly it's nothing more than that. You can't find anything other than experience, can you? I mean, where would you find it? You can't leave. You can't exactly leave experience to find something outside of experience, because if you find it, then you're experiencing it. So by definition, it's an experience. And every experience is unique too, right? You can't experience two of something exactly. You can if you're vague enough. I say, well, that chair is pretty much like that chair. In fact, all these chairs are the same. They aren't. They're completely different. Every one of them. They're in different places. They're made out of different stuff. They have different precise shapes on them. If I measured to the nanometer exactly the layout of each tack on each one of these, they'd all be different. They're all unique. Just like you're all just people. You're all kind of the same. That's just empty words. Everyone is so unique. Everything is so unique. You can't find two places in experience that are the same. This is different than this. This is different than this. That is different than that. You can't try and find two spots in your experience that are the same. You can't. It can't be done. So on that basis, how do you classify anything? Since everything is a one-off, there aren't really any types, unless you get very sloppy with your definitions. Or you're all just people. That sums it up. It's not untrue, but it's such a vague, absurd definition that it doesn't have much clout, does it? No one of you is like any other one of you. You're all completely unique. You're all one-off. You all have completely different history, completely different genetic structure, completely different strengths and weaknesses, completely different everything. Made of different matter in different places and different times. Everything about you is different. So if you keep the classifications vague enough, you can claim to have consistency. But if you start getting precise, everything's a one-off, and all of a sudden,
But aren't all definitions just in relationship to something else? We're
Right.
all people, not elephants, right? So
sure.
So
Of course.
it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not precise, but it's meant to be precise enough to distinguish.
Yeah, classification of type. And this is it's a really fascinating phenomena, but it's all abstraction but real objects are not abstractions. This is the important distinction. Elephants is an abstraction. Humans is an abstraction. That is not an abstraction. So I can say that's a human, that's not an elephant, but actually it's neither. That is that. And I can't possibly say what it is, because it's not like anything. It's itself. But again, if you're sloppy enough, that's a human, it's a male, it's blah 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 blah. You can. But again, all of these really broad definitions, they don't really give us. They don't tell us what anything is. They just enable us to pretend we have some handle on things.
Right. That's what I'm getting. It's like they all add up to a kind of I don't know, a construct of some sort.
Yes, but the important point is an accumulation of generalities does not equal a specific.
No, I can see that, but that's
You can have
how it feels.
You can have,
right?
30,000 generalities, and and the fact that there's so many of them does not condense down to precision. Doesn't work. You don't gain anything from it. You gain the illusion.
Yes.
Of knowing, I know what the world is. I know
Yes.
all about the world. I know about matter. I know about the laws of physics. I know about sociology. I know about humans. I know about the vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know history. I know archaeology. I know astronomy. I know, astrophysics. I know a little bit about all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all bullshit. I don't know shit. I can talk a good game because I'm speaking in generalities, which isn't about actually anything in particular. And reality is made up of particulars, not generalities. There's no generalities in reality. They don't exist. This is this. This is exactly this, no more, no less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can't find anything here that's not a this.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't find anything here that it becomes a generality. Generalities only exist in our bullshitting. Oh, it's a cup, and it's pottery, and it's made out of clay, and pottery is clay that's been fired at a temperature of at least, it's like, it's all bullshit.
Yep.
Well, you're agreeable. Argue with me, come on.
Well, I do agree. I mean, it's more and more I just feel all this. It still seems, happily in place, but I can't. It's also sort of meaningless, which is kind of interesting, actually.
Well, I mean, that's the fallacy, is that by having all these generalities, we're actually assigning some meaning. We're actually accumulating meaning.
Well,
and it doesn't work. We don't actually get any actual meaning. We just get the appearance of meaning. We get to talk very eruditely about nothing in particular.
Yeah, and whatever meaning, whatever category that is, for that matter, because, again, I feel sort of, I don't know, oddly easy with meaninglessness. It just doesn't seem to mean anything. It means itself.
Yes, exactly. Anything and everything means itself. And you can't go beyond that. You can't go farther than that. And you can't say what that is. You can't add to anything to that. And that sounds like it may be disempowering, but actually it's profoundly empowering, because it shows you where to look. If you want to know what anything is, all you have to do is look at it, and that's what it is. You don't have to be a good bullshitter. Just be with it, and that's what it is.
So even if you're looking with your bullshit, that's still what it is, right?
Sure, of course. Bullshit's bullshit. Bullshit's genuine bullshit. Grade A, 100%.
Well, so the whole, yeah, I was going to say there's nowhere to land. It's actually there's nowhere not to land.
Right. Nowhere to land, nowhere not to land. Just this. The beginning and ending is just this. Right? This right here. And when you see that, things are a lot simpler. But nothing's excluded, because everything is this right here. Bullshitting is right here. Functionality is right here. Playing the human game is right here. All of it comes with. And none of it is anything other than what it is. And none of it makes any sense. None of it can be explained or even described.
Mm-hmm. Feels like you can play with it, though.
Well, what else can you do?
Yeah. Well, that sort of feels like what where the fun of the whole sense of distinction comes from, is that the sense that if everything's just all one, shall we say, then you can't really play with it. You can't be there in a way to play with it.
Is that true?
I don't know.
Because
I'm sort of throwing it out there.
Because this is infinitely different from itself.
Mm.
This is infinitely participatory with itself, i.e. experiencing spontaneously is very dynamic. It zooms into phenomena, zooms out of phenomena, takes big pictures, takes little precise close-ups spontaneously, and always with spontaneity, with novelty. Always something new is appearing. It's always a presentation of something amazing and revelatory. always something surprising, something that has never been seen before. So, I think the very essence of experience is a never-ending play. Unstoppable. I mean, try stopping it. Try to take your experience and make it just static, make it just go, Doesn't happen, does it? I mean, attention jumps around, you're thinking of this, and you see that, and you hear this, and you feel that, and, it's like this crazy, unstoppable dynamism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Experience is always new. Every instant you experience something you've never experienced before, right? I mean, every instant you see something you've never seen before. Every instant you think something you never thought before. Every instant you feel something you never felt before. Exactly. If you're sloppy with your classifications, I'm just seeing, feeling my body and seeing a room full of people, and it's kind of boring, But that's the fault of not acknowledging all of the incredible precision and specificity that is always present in experience, and all of which reveals absolute uniqueness. I see your face. I mean, I've seen your face, dozens and dozens of times, and yet I've never seen it the same way twice. I've never seen it the same color twice because the light's always different light. I see it from a slightly different angle and things are shifting. I mean, everything is completely different always, and so it's always a complete, unique experience. Surprising, interesting, provocative, etc., etc., etc. And there's no experience whatsoever that can be found that is any other than that. There's no consistency whatsoever. It's always unique. It's always new. It's always a one-off. That's the fact, and the only way you cannot notice that fact is to try to inhabit, generalities which are inclusive, which you can only do in your imagination. You can't do it in actuality. You can't make your actual experience uniform. You can only pretend you are. I mean, you've probably heard me say this many times, but for example, you can sit looking at a blank wall with your body motionless and the light motionless and nothing moving anywhere in your field of vision, but still every instant your experience will be different. Every instant. You can sit for 2 hours looking at a blank wall and you won't see it the same way twice. It won't happen. It's a real easy experiment to do. Arguably boring for some. Well, nothing. You can't find sameness. The only sameness you can find, arguably, is the fact of experience itself. But that can't be found as a thing, so that's kind of turns out to be an empty assertion, too. Experience shows up as its specifics, and its specifics are always unique and always dynamic.
How do you reconcile the nature of experience being unique and specific with the nature of experience being indeterminate?
Nothing to reconcile, it's just empirical observations.
It's not contradictory?
I don't know. Maybe it is. But, there's no reason that experience shouldn't be contradictory, I suppose. I don't know. The interesting thing about indeterminacy is indeterminacy itself is indeterminate. In other words, you can't say exactly what it consists of. You can't pin it down either. All you can say is it's a fact that when you look at things, you can't get to the bottom of them in any field of experience. I mean, in any of the sense fields. In other words, there's always a factor of fuzziness, let's say, or of lack of sharp edges. Speaking sort of euphemistically. But you can't define why that is or what that is or how that works either. So indeterminacy itself is indeterminate. So it's hard to say exactly what indeterminacy is. So it's sort of just an empirical observation, and it's a vague assertion itself, even that there is indeterminacy. But it's observably the case in the sense that you can't get to anything with absolute precision, absolute finality, in terms of resolving exactly what it is, exactly how it is, in experience. And what was the other quality we were looking at?
Well, you were mentioning that the nature of experience, at least I thought you were mentioning that it's precision and specificity to uniqueness.
Specificity, yeah. Yeah, it's strange that it is, everything is specifically exactly what it is, but you can never resolve exactly what that is. And again, this is an empirical observation. It's, it sort of falls, it sort of gets very fuzzy in the face of theory. You can't get a handle on it. You can't define that or say why that is so or even what it consists of. But empirically, we can say, I am clearly experiencing exactly what I'm experiencing in this instant. Let's say in my field of vision, I'm seeing exactly what I'm seeing. There's no doubt about that. I'm not seeing something else. And yet, I can't precisely resolve anything in my field of vision with absolute coherence, with absolute sharpness. But it is nonetheless exactly what it is. And in the next instant, it's different. I'm seeing something different, maybe subtly different, but still absolutely different. And I still can't resolve what it is. So, again, I don't know that I can make any sense of that. But again, expecting to make sense of it is flying in the face of the nature of indeterminacy. You can't make sense of that either, because again, it doesn't resolve into coherence. It doesn't resolve into precision or sharpness. And I think this is how we confuse ourselves with the fantasy or the expectation that things ought to or should resolve, have a final resolution or a finality or a precision of what exactly they are. And then the fact that we can't find that is frequently, I think, a tormenting feeling that, I'm missing it, I'm losing it, I got to get on top of this, I got to figure out what's going on, or whatever, however that shows up in your life. But, the revelation that things are intrinsically not resolvable is kind of a load-off. We can relax into the dreamlike quality, the irresolvable quality of our life with some ease, without worrying, without being afraid that we're somehow screwing up or missing it or not getting the job done or whatever, right? Depending on how you hold it.
Isn't the delusion of objectivity, basically all the bullshit, what makes the experience worth experiencing?
I don't know. I mean, worth experiencing is itself a kind of a interesting philosophical notion. Experience is a fact, whether or not it's worth anything is sort of spin doctoring. Anyway, so I don't know. Maybe experience isn't worth experiencing, but that doesn't make it go away. So I think that from my point of view, trying to find out what experience is as directly and nakedly as possible is more interesting than holding it to be something or other that I find convenient. That may not be the case. But that's just my own personal approach. I know a lot of people, and probably the majority of people, disagree with me. Most people very much assert their worldviews and assert their point of view, and damn the torpedoes, you know. So obviously that the strategy I'm advocating isn't a popular one.
But don't all the definitions make the experience more vibrant?
I don't think so. Because the definitions are themselves a product of experience. So any vibrancy that's there has to be coming from experience itself. You can't add a vibrancy that's not inherently there because the very faculty or facility of coming up with definitions is an artifact of experience itself, or let's say the potency, the power of experience, right? The functionality of experience. In other words, it's experience itself that does all our abstractions, it does our abstract thinking, and that's where it comes from. So any vibrancy or qualities that are added aren't being brought in from somewhere else. They are inherent in experience itself.
One of my life as I go through it or live it or whatever often is a considerable amount of confusion happens.
Whose isn't? Anyone here has a life that's not confusing to some degree? Show of hands.
Okay. It looks like you don't have very much confusion now.
Certainly I do.
You do?
Of course.
Yeah?
Sure.
It looks much more clear looking at you than it does for me to be looking at me.
Well, that's first of all, that's your take on it. You
Yeah.
don't know what it looks like from my point of view.
Right.
And second of all, I'm quite clear that I'm confused and that there's confusion, and experience is confusing as hell.
Yeah.
So, so I'm clear about that.
Okay. Well, that's
It's not a state of it's kind of a meta non-confusion. It's not non-confusion. It's kind of getting slippery there, slippery slope by the time we get up into that.
yeah, meta non-confusion.
Meta-
What is that?
We're coining a whole new branch of philosophy here. Or pseudo-philosophy, more like.
Well, it's funny. It seems to get more and more extreme. Sometimes I have some extreme clarity, and sometimes some extreme confusion. But as I get older, both of those conditions or states seem to get more accentuated.
Sure. There is an aspect of clarity to this. There is an aspect of confusion to this. You can't. You can never isolate them, can you? You can't take the clarity out and put it over here and have it be pristine and pure and just sitting there, right? You can't take the confusion and do likewise. You can say, yeah, there's confusion, sure. Yeah, there's clarity, sure. You know, but again, you can't. It's not like you can sort it out, can you?
No.
But you can see that clearly. So, you know, confusion is one thing, but confusion about confusion is another. That's the meta confusion part.
All right.
To get back to our
I mean, when you look back in your life a few years ago, say, or whenever, some previous time, I know you may not. I mean, does that seem like that's the same? That you were the same person who you were back then, or who you are now? I mean, does change?
I feel like I am what I have always been, exactly what we mean by who I've always been is kind of up for grabs, isn't it?
Yeah.
But just the fact that I feel like that doesn't necessarily make it so. I feel like that now. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, does it seem to you that you're getting more and more clarity as you live your life?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
But again, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm right.
Yeah.
Was no. I don't think clarity and I kind of, it's my fault because I started talking about confusion tonight. I don't really know how much clarity and confusion are really, primally valuable ways to look at this.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of constants in the equation, and there's kind of always some of both. And that fact is interesting, but beyond that fact, you can't really get much mileage out of it. But like I said, it's probably my fault for bringing it up at the beginning. But that's what popped into my head, so that's what came out of my mouth. Sorry about that. I warned you. I have a little bit of a flu, so I warned you I was confused tonight.
I didn't hear that part.
Oh.
I was a little bit late. So you're excused then.
Oh, yeah, or not. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Well, if I have if I'm not worried about confusion or being confused, then I don't think it exists in the same way at all. It just, it seems confusion only exists in some sense of not wanting to be confused or feeling like you need to have
But,
something else.
it turns out, I think, that confusion and clarity are both these kind of vague generalities that I was poo-pooing earlier, because exactly what is confusion, exactly what is clarity, and again, when you begin to look more precisely, experientially, at what those qualities consist of, you find a broad range of experiential qualities, just like when you look at people, like our generalities of human beings versus elephants. I can say with some confidence there's no elephants in this room and there's a lot of humans in that general term, but of course you're each absolutely unique in actuality. And the same with confusion. We talk about confusion, it's kind of like talking about elephants. It's a broad sweeping assertion that there's this thing called confusion, but again, when you look at any particular degree of confusion, you find particularities, you find specifics which will be different than other specifics, and there's always uniqueness. I mean, one of the really striking things to me about experience is its absolute uniqueness. The way that specific experience is always absolutely unique in every regard. In other words, it has exactly the characteristics that it has at the moment, period.
Infinitely. Infinitely.
Oh, sure, yeah, why not?
I think that's... If you say something's very particular, it almost... that by itself feels like it's getting very small or very confined or very framed in some way. But there's this sense of everything. It's like there's no. It's perfectly. It's like infinitely particular.
Yeah.
So, and there's this quality.
This is what I mean by
about
this is what I try to refer to by the coexistence of specificity and indeterminacy. Every specific is precisely itself in terms of its absolute specificity, but it's also absolutely indeterminate in the sense that it doesn't resolve to anything, which sounds confusing as hell. It sounds like gibberish. It sounds like their opposites are mutually exclusive. But experientially, that makes perfect sense, and it's quite self-evident if you look in your experience. And who said experience is supposed to make sense anyway? That's what we keep stubbing our toes against. Is
to throw another label at it. It's also enjoyable. in some way.
Oh, sure.
It seems free. It seems sort of wonderful. I don't know how else to put it. It's like anything can be compared to. It doesn't exist.
Right. Sure.
So,
I mean, this what we're talking about is the same thing that Buddhist philosophers tried to talk about in the Heart Sutra. Form is the void, and void is the form. Form is not other than the void. Void is not other than the form. I mean, you substitute specificity for form and indeterminacy for void, and you have that whole equation right there. And does it make sense? No, it makes no sense at all. But it's empirically observable. And it's very profound, Arguably, the Buddhists thought it was profound. I agree. From my perspective, it's profound. So I'll second that motion, and you can see what mileage you get out of it for yourself.
So far, so good.
There's another interesting aspect of the uniqueness of experience, that there's a cumulative uniqueness of experience, that experience doesn't exist in a vacuum of, and I hate to say prior experiences. So you sitting there looking at that blackboard, there's an evolutionary, directional aspect to the uniqueness of your thoughts.
Sure, yeah. Every aspect of it is unique, and both instantaneously and cumulatively and holographically, and any way you look at it, it spells an astounding. It is itself. It is in its selfness.
But isn't there a referential aspect to that your thought now is in relationship to your prior thought, which is one of the reasons why you're never at the exact same place again?
Well, we can make that assertion that it is referential, but not necessarily. It may be some other relationship that is not referential per se. In other words, we can't. In other words, for example, take the theory of cause and effect. That something happens because something else happened. That's only one interpretation of events. It may be there may be a correlation between events, but it may not be causal. It may be some other principle entirely. So we can suppose that it's referential, or we can suppose that it's causal, but that's just one theory. We can't really know. All we can say is they coexist meaningfully. They say maybe it forms a meaningful gestalt or something.
But that other principle, whatever it may be, or other principles are not easily experienced as that cause and effect relationship.
Well, who knows? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the fact is that experience is what it is, and we can never say authoritatively or definitively what that is or how that is, right? But we can observe that, we can make these sort of generalizations, as you're talking about, that there is a kind of a cumulative uniqueness or, apparent relationality or apparent meaningfulness. But again, exactly to get to the bottom of exactly what that is and how it works or anything, again, I think we're gonna end up diving off into theory, which is just basically going to be hypothesis and guesswork. So, well, who knows?
What about applying hypothetically directionality to experience?
Well, you can apply anything hypothetically again, and that's doable, but still you're stuck with a hypothesis at the end of the day. And it's not verifiable one way or the other.
But experience bears it out. Experience bears out the directionality of experience.
You can make that argument, but you could argue the other way around. Maybe time flows from the future into the past, and causality works in reverse, and we just see it ass backwards.
It's not quite what I'm experiencing, but maybe.
Well, but again, the point is we can't know on the basis of what we're experiencing how it works. We can hypothesize. We can say it's meaningful to look in terms of causality. It's meaningful to look in terms of historical accumulation and so on. But we can't know for sure that that's actually how it is. We can say it looks like that, but it could be something else that's wildly bizarre, bizarrely irrational and inconceivable, but is more true than that or something. I mean, who knows? But that's just another assertion. I mean, basically, we can't say all we really have is the fact itself, and any explanation by its very nature is going off into fantasy, into intellection.
This is a bit of a one-off, but I'd be interested to hear your response on it. There's a show called something like the Wormhole of the Universe, and it's narrated by Morgan Freeman, and it's this show about various scientific principles, and it goes into time travel, and it goes into very aspects of physics and things like that. And the idea of time travel, they brought a lot of these scientists on that were debating the possibility of time travel, and some of these scientists actually had kind of proved, of course not absolute, but had some proof that if you could do certain things, you could go backward or forward in time, and some well thought of. This wasn't completely in left field, but the idea of time travel itself, here and now is it, like, and the past is nothing but a thought, and the future is nothing but a thought. So the idea of time travel seems ludicrous with that understanding. It's a futile.
But we can't know. Because, I mean, if you did time travel, then that would be here and now. Right?
Exactly.
So it would look, I mean, like if I could suddenly be in 1781,
You'd still be here now.
It would be here now, only it would look like 1781. So did I really time travel, or did just everything change to appear to be exactly the way it was then?
Right.
And can you even distinguish those two? I don't know. And is it possible to experience more than one time at once? I don't know. Maybe just because we don't seem to doesn't mean it's not possible. Maybe all of a sudden you will. Who knows? You can't say what's possible or not. All you can do is sort of generalize about what is currently the case, and you can't even pin that down. You can't say definitively. I mean, maybe right now you are experiencing many times at once, only that looks like what you call now. And in some very strange, nonlinear, irrational way, it's the juxtaposition of different times and different universes and some, inconceivable. I mean, who knows, right? It's just speculation. But maybe it is. Maybe it could be. Who knows? But what would that look like? Well, maybe it looks just like this. But again, since you can't pin down exactly what's happening here or how it's happening, all we really have is the empirical fact of what we call experience, then we can speculate all these different ways of looking at it, which are fascinating and interesting and all that, and some of them are potentially valuable in terms of being exploitable, but that doesn't make them true. I think the interesting factor, I mean, theoretically this is a meeting oriented around spirituality in some sense, whatever that means. I think an interesting factor is to notice how profoundly you can be with your experience, and the less you hold it to be one thing or another in any terms whatsoever, the more profoundly and intimately you can embrace everything that actually presents itself as it actually presents itself. I think that it's our tendency to interpret things or hypothesize that things are this or that, and to hold that as being either strongly possible or, what's worse, just objectively true, that acts like blinders and keeps us from noticing aspects of our experience that are actually quite self-evident and available if we could be with it more fluidly, more relaxedly, less graspingly in terms of insisting it's this or that. For example, I mean, a simple example is an objective world. I mean, it's very commonplace that consensus reality these days is, well, there's an objective world. There's a world out there that actually exists, and I am some little semi-autonomous machine, essentially biological machine running around in this bigger space. Well, that's great. I mean, it's a fine hypothesis. I'm not even saying it's not true. Maybe it is true. But if you hold that hypothesis, for example, it may inhibit you from noticing the incredible fluidity of experience. For example, if you think, well, the room's just a room and it's inert, it's just sitting here, it's not doing anything, it's not changing much. But in actuality, my experience of this room is more like watching water go over a waterfall or something. I'm noticing something different every instant. I'm seeing different shapes, I'm seeing different lights, I'm seeing fluctuations, I'm seeing a constant fluidity and dynamism.
The lights help.
So, so to me the interesting challenge is how nakedly, how directly, how intimately can you be with your experience? And what do you find when you do so? When you are with your experience very directly, one thing you'll notice is an end to boredom, because you'll notice how unique your experience is every instant, how constantly changing it is, how it's always presenting novelty, it's always presenting spontaneity. It never repeats itself. You can be in your bedroom or some place, some environment which you see, for great periods of time every day, totally familiar to you. And yet if you actually look at your experience of being in that space, it's always unique every instant, and every instant you will be having a different experience of that panorama than you have ever had in any previous instant or in any future instant. Constantly dynamic, constantly vibrant, constantly fluid. And simply by that alone, we discover, we remove ourselves from boredom, we discover spontaneity, we discover presence, we discover a profound meaningfulness that's very nonlinear, and it just comes from being with the flow of experience itself, or the apparent flow of experience, let's say, without holding it to be this or that, removing it from these superimposed frameworks of staticness or objectivity or dullness or whatever. And it's not to say that those conditions are absolutely not the case. Who knows? Maybe they are. I'm not saying it's not, but the point is not whether or not something is a condition. The point is to come to experience our experience more profoundly in a way that allows us to enjoy it more, to appreciate it more, to perceive subtle aspects of it that we may be in the habit of closing ourselves off from because of our obtuseness and our obsession with our frames of reference, which ultimately and finally only exist in our mind.
I guess when you conceptualize less, and you're not putting captions and labels on things, I guess language becomes less just naturally.
Becomes less what?
Well, language. There must not be a need for language in terms of speaking, and because that's mostly generated from.
Well, it's not a matter of less. It's a matter of having it take up a smaller portion of the real estate of your experience. In actuality, thought is a relatively small portion of our experience. Language and conceptualization is an even smaller portion of our experience. The field of vision, for example, is not a thought. It has nothing to do with thought. It has nothing to do with language. It has nothing to do with definitions. Same with the field of hearing. Same with the field of touch. Same with, sort of fields of subtle sensation, like moods or whatever. These are they are qualitative, experiential, whatever, energy presences. We don't have language for this. We can't say what it is, but except that it is what it is. And these are actualities. These are actual presences that are not thoughts, are not ideas. Thoughts and ideas do happen, but they happen in a relatively small, let's say, portion of the real estate of our experience. In terms of the totality of the field of experience, thought takes place, where it does, wherever that is. Obviously, where is not even necessarily a relevant consideration. But it's a relatively small portion of your experience. So you don't even need to cease thought or stop thought or suppress it or anything like that, or even defining is fine. But thought and defining exists in an experiential context which is not thought, which is not defining. Vision is not a thought. Vision is not a definition. Vision is a presence of light and color and texture and whatever, however you want to qualify what's present, and so on with all the other sense fields and various other subtle mental experience and so on. So all of this qualitative experience is present in actuality. Experience is actually present, and it's not a concept, it's not an idea. And most of it is not an idea, most of it is not a thought. Only the portion of it which actually is thought is a thought, and that portion of it is fairly limited. So it's just a matter of noticing that fact. It's not a matter of shutting down your thought or making it smaller or extricating yourself from it. Just notice that it's actually a relatively small portion of your experiential field. It's like that stage over there. It's a good-sized stage, but it's not. This is a big space, and that stage is just there, and it's not imposing itself anywhere else. Over here is not the stage, that's where the stage is. Likewise, thought is where it is, and everywhere else in your experience is not thought, and thought is not getting in the way of anything. Thought doesn't get in the way of vision. It's not like my thoughts are, blocking, I can't see anything because these thoughts are in the way. It's not like that, is it? Thought exists in its own dimension, autonomously, and doesn't really impinge on anything else. So you can notice that, and then you can be with your experience directly outside the context of thought without needing to suppress thought, because you actually are with your experience outside of thought already. So when you're seeing, there's no thought in the way. This is direct experience. Vision is direct experience. It's actuality, non-conceptual, and so on and so forth.
Well, thought seems to have a referential perspective. If
it claims to,
but I guess that's just a seemingness, and it's not.
Well, that's the assertion of thought. Thought is, I'm thinking about something. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm thinking about what so-and-so said to me. I'm thinking about this. It's a story, but it's not really true, because you're not thinking about the actual event. You're thinking about a conceptual model of the event, which is not the same as the event. It just isn't. It can't be.
And the event's already happened.
Well, maybe it already happened, maybe it hasn't happened, whatever, but you're thinking about a mental version of it, and a mental version of something is not the thing. I'm thinking of this cup, but the thought of this cup is not this cup. This cup is this cup. And a thought's a thought.
Okay. Thanks.
So when I say I'm thinking about the cup, I'm not. It's a lie. I'm thinking a thought, which it looks somewhat like a cup, and it's claiming to be about this cup, but it actually is a separate thing, right? You get it? The thought's here and the cup's here. They aren't the same. I can't take the cup and put it in my thoughts. It just doesn't work that way. The cup exists in my field of vision, in my field of touch, in my field of hearing. It doesn't exist in my field of thought. Thought is flexible enough I can conjure up a replica of it that's close enough that I can say, oh, it's this cup I'm thinking of. But it's not. It's just like a sketch. It's a stick figure made of thought stuff, which is itself. It's not this. And the claim that it is this is just bravado. And that's how we trip ourselves up with all of this supposed referentiality.
Peter, here's one from left field.
Going out for a long one.
It's from somebody called Whitney Houston, who seemingly has risen from the dead. And they ask, did you take LSD back in the day?
I didn't inhale. And on that note, I wish you all a good night. Thanks for coming.